Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Tonight, President Biden is speaking and making remarks about comments that he made in which he said that Donald Trump should be put in a quote-unquote bullseye. Happened a week before the assassination attempt on the former president. President Biden giving an interview moments ago, and he said here it was a mistake.
You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term was bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies.
Joining us now is the congressman from the state of Maryland, the Democrat, Glenn Ivey. Congressman Ivey, thanks for being back with us here on the Hill. As you know, Congressman, Democrats have made this argument that Donald Trump is an existential threat, that he is a threat to democracy, and have suggested that if Trump wins, democracy is over. Do Democrats need to dial back that language and dial back that phrase as you see it?
Well, I think we need to be careful about how we say those kinds of things, but I think it's different than, as the president acknowledged, the comment about the bullseye. That's definitely places we shouldn't go. I remember a few years ago, a Republican had an ad that put AOC and literally in an ad in a bullseye in the crosshairs in one of her ads, right. And there have been a lot of comments that have been over the top. Certainly President Trump is not. I don't know that he should be casting the first stone on that kind of thing, because he's made a lot of statements along those lines too. But I think we really need to move away from certainly violent rhetoric of that kind of thing. I do think, though, that yes, there's a call for unity, but this is a campaign. Democrats and Republicans have fundamentally different views about how the country should be run. And I think it's important for us to point those things out so that voters understand what the clear choices are.
Has President Biden weathered the storm as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done well. Certainly since the debate, he's had, the church speech in Philadelphia. I thought the NATO speech was really excellent. He did the almost hour-long press conference afterwards. There have been a number of public events in between there. He's been great at rallies and the like. I thought his speech to the nation last night was very strong as well. So, but I think it's important for him to keep doing those kinds of things, and more importantly, the substance is what matters. He's got to make sure he's explaining to the American people where he's going to take the country. It's important for us as Democrats to show the positive things he's done, but we really have to talk about the future, too.
So you talk about the issues. Let's go through them. Immigration. When polled, Trump versus Biden. The country is Trump in the most recent poll, Trump plus 17. Confidence in the economy over Biden, Trump plus 14. The only real major issue of which the president tops the former president is on abortion, and it's only +4. When you look at the two biggest issues, the economy and immigration, if he's trailing in double digits, how do you win an issues economy, in issues election, rather?
Well, I think if you look at the battleground states, I mean, those are margin of error votes by and large. And, immigration's been an issue, for example, in New York State that was huge, but Tom Suozzi won his congressional race on that issue. And I think the key is to make sure we point out that there was a bipartisan Senate bill that was killed by former President Trump and House Republicans. Trump gave the order that he didn't want that bill to move forward, even though it would have added more border agents, even though it would have added more judges to resolve these cases, because, explicitly, he didn't want to give a win to President Biden on that issue. So when voters hear that, and I think it's important for us to make sure they hear the whole piece, they come down in a very different place on it.
Do you know of any other Democrats, Congressman, who are going to come out and call for the president to step aside?
I don't, but there may be others. I don't want to sit here and act like there won't be any, but I think the key point is this. I think, what do we have, 20 or so? We've got 200 or so members of Congress who support him, and, I think most of the 50 senators as well. So the vast majority of Democrats are with him. And the key thing, though, too, I think, again, is where are the voters in the battleground states? We're in the margin of error for most of those. I think we're ahead in Michigan. We can win this election. We just have to get back focused on the issues and make sure we explain to the country where we're going to go.
Thank you for watching, and make sure you go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.